Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be listening to the opening keynote from Children's Institute 2022 in Phoenix, Arizona, with Karen Walrond, author of the Lightmaker's Manifesto. I am absolutely thrilled to invite up here the author Karen Walrond. Karen is a lawyer, leadership coach, photographer, author, and activist. Her latest book, The Lightmaker's Manifesto, How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy, beckons readers towards lives of integrity, advocacy, conviction, and joy. She is a certified Dare to Lead facilitator, trained in Brené Brown's research on empathy, courage, and vulnerability, and serves on the board of the Houston Coalition Against Hate. Karen and her work have been featured on PBS, Huffington Post, CNN.com, and The Oprah Winfrey Show. Karen and her family live in Houston, Texas, and she has, Blue Willow. And she has agreed very graciously to come here to kick off our very first in-person show in 2.5 years, and I am so honored to have her here. Karen, thank you so much.
Hello. Are you still sleeping? Was Ibram Kimmy so exciting yesterday that you're just like still getting over it? Was he amazing? I'm so sorry I missed that. I'm so glad to be here. I am thrilled to be here. I was thinking this is actually my first in-person event in 3 years, which is insane. I'm so excited to be here. My publisher, when they called me and they said, okay, the ABA, they want you to come speak and you're going to say yes, they said. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? And then I looked you guys up. You all are amazing. You're wonderful, wonderful people. Like the fact that you guys open kids' minds to like real life heroes and fantasy heroes and people who look like them who are heroes and just expand their minds. I mean, y'all are my kind of people. So thank you so much for inviting me. I actually grew up in on a small island in the Caribbean called Trinidad. Any Trinis here? No Trinis? Hey, what going on, girl? Nice to see you. Right, okay, so, excuse me. So Trinidad, for those of you who are unfamiliar, it's, you know where Cuba is, right? Okay, it's not near Cuba. And you all know where Jamaica is, right? Not there either. So if you follow the chain of islands all the way down, it's the very last one, right next to Venezuela, right? So it's really, really far down. And I grew up in a fishing village, Mayaro. You know Mayaro? Right, you know Mayaro. So I grew up in a small fishing village there, and I was the kid, I was the dork that was always reading, right? Like I read and read constantly. And I'm the daughter of a PhD in engineering, and my mother speaks 5 languages. And so they get education in reading, but they were concerned. So if they were concerned. And I remember like my mom telling me many times, like, Karen, go outside, look at it. It's pretty outside, the beach looking beautiful. Why you always reading? You can't stay inside all the time. Go outside. And so what would I do? Take the book out. See, I knew you all were my people. I would pick up my book and I would go outside. So definitely. So it's an honor to be here. Okay, so I wrote a book called The Lightmaker's Manifesto, How to Work for Change Without Losing Your Joy, and Kim and I are going to get to talk about that a bit, but I thought I would give you a little bit of a story of how it came to be and how I came to write the book, if that's okay with you. Yeah? Yeah, with me? All right, awesome. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you is this photograph. So you see that pile of rubble? That is my house. And this actually was about 18 months. This was like in March 2018, which was about 6 months after one morning we woke up, my husband and my daughter and I, to our phones losing it, these alarm, and it was a tornado alarm. So we did what we do in Houston, Texas, when there's a tornado alarm. We went to an interior corridor. But my husband is English, and he is not familiar with extreme weather. And so he decided he wanted to go outside to see the tornado coming. And that luckily for us, there was no tornado coming, but what there was feet of water that was about 6 inches from our front door. Because Hurricane Harvey had just made landfall the night before, south of us in Corpus Christi, and had turned and was headed to Houston. Y'all remember Hurricane Harvey? Yeah, I remember it intimately, okay, because it came inside. So we ended up flooding. We lost everything in our house. The water sat there for about 3 weeks. Does that sound right? About 3 weeks? I'm looking to my wonderful Blue Willow folks here. About 3 weeks, and it turns out 3 weeks of 3 feet of water in your house is enough to ruin everything, right? Especially in the summertime, because when you have a humid place and lots of water, you grow mold, and so it's really gross. So this was taken 6 months later, when we had finally demolished our ruin of our house, and then we spent 8 months building the new house, and we finished right before 2019. So that's the house I live in now, sort of in progress. And then 2019 was about getting our feet back under us, right? We finally moved back in, and my daughter, when we started, when Hurricane Harvey happened, was just starting middle school, and that's always a fun, confident time in a kid's life. So we spent trying to make sure she was okay, right? Our jobs were okay. We were doing all of those things. And by the time 2019 rolled around, the end of it, so we'd been in the house a year, I was like, okay, enough of this sleepwalking. It's time for me to get back into the world, right? I'm gonna get back in. And I have had a habit many years running, I promise I'm gonna get to the book, of choosing a word of the year, right? So it was December, it was the end of December, and I thought, okay, my word of the year for 2020 is going to be bold. That's gonna be it. I'm gonna have color in my life again. I'm gonna wear color, stop wearing all this black and gray, and I'm gonna wear color, and I'm gonna do bold things. And I couldn't come up with just one word, so then I thought, okay, and experiment. I'm gonna experiment with things. I'm gonna be like Shonda Rhimes, the year of saying yes, right? I'm gonna do all of these things. So those were my 2 words, and then January 2nd, 2020, I got an email from a woman who I'd never heard of before, and she said, hi, I'm Valerie, and I work for a publisher called Broadleaf Books, and I have been following your blog, because I'm a big blogger. I've been following your blog for a while, and I read an essay that you contributed to an anthology, and we are looking for a book on the intersection of joy and activism, and can I talk to you about that? Because I think you might be the person to write it. So, bold and experiment. So I said, yes, of course we can talk. So we got on the phone, she's like, yeah, I think that there's something here, and I'm like, yes, there is. And she goes, and I think you can write it, and I said, yes, I can. And then I hung up the phone, and I thought, what the hell am I doing? I am not an activist. I am not an activist, right? Okay, I've done some activisty things, right? I'm a photographer. I've done a few women's marches, right? That's activisty. And I've participated in a couple of pride parades, right? And so, okay, sure, but I'm not an activist. Okay, I've traveled to Africa with an NGO a few times, right? Being a photographer and a photojournalist for them. But that's not an activist, right? An activist is somebody who gets tear gassed. An activist is somebody who stands in front of tanks in Tiananmen Square. They get police dogs set on them. They get arrested. Those are activists. I am not an activist. And yet I've just signed up to write this book. So I thought, all right. Well, I had written a book about 10 years earlier called The Beauty of Different. And I interviewed a lot of people and photographed a lot of people to find out how they had turned the thing that made them different into the source of their beauty and maybe even a superpower. And I loved that process. I loved interviewing people and getting to know their stories. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm not an activist, but maybe I know a few activists and I could do the same there, right? So I started to come up with a list. I'm a big journaler, and that's going to be important later on, but I'm a big journaler, so I grabbed my journal and I started writing down the names of people who I thought I can interview. And the first person who came to mind is the person that you see on your left, Brene Brown. Some of you know her, yeah? Yeah. So Brene is actually a Houstonian, and she's been a friend of mine for decades. And she, for those of you who are unfamiliar with her work, she writes a lot and speaks a lot on courage and vulnerability and shame, but as part of that work, she also works really tirelessly against, homophobia and racism and transphobia, and she does immigration rights, and she does all of these really amazing things. So I'm like, okay, Brene's a dear friend, Brene will talk to me, so I'll put her on the list. The second person who came into mind is the woman on the right. Some of you may also recognize her, that is Tarana Burke. She is the founder of the Me Too movement, and she is so amazing. She is all about centering the people who have been the victims of sexual violence, and she's really sort of tireless in making sure that any solutions we come up to are victim-centered, right? And survivor-centered. So I added her to the list. I'm like, Tarana will talk to me, right? And I started coming up with all of these people, and I came up with, I don't know, maybe a dozen people that I thought I could talk to. And then I looked at the list and I realized, these people do amazing work, but they're not necessarily people, to my knowledge, who have ever stood in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square, or have had police dogs set on them, or have been arrested. Well, I mean, Tarana might have been arrested a couple of times. Tarana's been an activist a long time. But they're not people that I necessarily associate with that, right? These aren't the people. So why was it okay for me to call these people activists, but not call myself an activist, right? So maybe that's what I need to work towards. So I began writing, and the result is the Lightmaker's Manifesto. And I don't know if you guys have been following the timeline here, but I signed the deal for this book in March 2020. Anything happen in 2020? So when I started writing this book, first of all, yes, there was this horrible, horrible virus that was going around, but and people were dying, and it was terrifying, but also we'd just go inside for 3 weeks and it would pass, right? But yes, people were dying. People were doing makeshift morgues, right? Who would have thought that? And George Floyd was still alive when I started writing this book. Breonna Taylor was still alive when I started writing this book, right? So come about June, my publisher, Valerie, the woman who contacted me, called me, and she said, I am so sorry. She was like, I can't believe I'm making you write a book about activism and joy in this dumpster fire of a year. And I told her, I laughed and I said, it was actually such a gift, right? Because, when everything seems hopeless, and y'all remember, it's bad now, but 2020 was a crazy year. There is something about speaking to people who have made it their life's work, or maybe sometimes even their work on the side to try to make the world better. Right? There's a lot of hope that comes from that. So it really was a gift to be able to write it in that time. And I also share that with you just to say, if I can write about joy and activism in 2020, that there must be something there, right? There's something to it. So before I invite Kim up here, I wanted to share a couple of definitions, right? Because I figured when I was going to start writing this book, I needed to really get clear on what joy was and what activism is, or else it doesn't make sense, right? Joy and activism don't seem to make sense together. So the first thing is joy. So joy is not happiness. I want to be sort of really clear about that. As part of the research I did for the book, I read a wonderful book called The Book of Joy, and it's co-written by Bishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And one of the things I think it's Bishop Tutu says is that joy subsumes happiness. It's bigger than happiness. He says that, just to be clear, so happiness is like what happens when somebody wishes you a happy birthday, or somebody gets your latte order right, or you get some good news. Joy is deeper, and I think it was Bishop Tutu said, if you think about joy, it can often be derived from pain and difficulty. And the example he used was a woman who was giving birth, right? Like when you go through hours of labor, you go through the pain of labor, and then as soon as the baby is born, all you feel is joy. So it doesn't have to only come from happy things. It's the sort of thing that you feel when you work really hard and you achieve something, you did what you set out to do, or when perhaps somebody comes into your stores and says, thank you so much for what you did. You changed my life, or you changed my child's life, or you made me think differently about something, right? So if you think of joy as coming from meaning and purpose, which I think it is, it doesn't seem that distant from activism anymore, right? Yeah? Y'all still with me, yeah? Yeah, awesome. So that's joy. And speaking of activism, I came up with a new definition of activism, or what an activist is, and it is this. It's somebody who is led by their values to purposeful action in the hope of making the world brighter for others. I'm going to say it again. Somebody who is led by their values to purposeful action in the hope of making the world brighter for others, right? So now when you think of that definition, now activism starts to feel a little bit bigger than just protest, right? It certainly includes protest, but it can also include what Brené does, right? In fighting for the rights of other people through her words and through her Netflix specials and through her books, right? It's what Tarana does. And I would argue it's what you guys do, right? Because you guys, I will wager, got into this work because you believe in big concepts like literacy and education. You believe that books, when put in the hands of kids, can inspire them to dream big and do really big things, right? You're led by your values to brighten and broaden their horizons so that they can see people different from them, and in so doing, maybe even learn something about themselves. And if that's not activism, I don't know what is, right? You all agree with me, yeah? All right, so welcome, Lightmakers, right? Like, you're all here. And I'm so glad to be here with you. Okay. So this is sort of the basis of the book. Now, the question, of course, becomes, because I know that you all love what you do, and you all got into it because you love these sorts of big things, but I mean, I imagine that it can be sometimes a bit soul-sucking as well. It can be a bit challenging and a bit difficult. And I imagine that there are probably some clients that have come into your stores that maybe they didn't make you shine the way that you wanted to, right? So what I want to talk about is how do you continue to do the amazing work that you do, and also stay in conversation with and be able to access joy. And I call the ability to do that light making, right? You're making light for others, but you're making light for yourself. And as I spoke to all of these luminaries, right, to just beat the light metaphor to death, as I spoke to all of them, I realized that what they do is sort of like what you do when you build a fire. And there's sort of a metaphor in building a fire that you could do. So the first thing that you would do, and that they do, is you create a clearing, right? You create some space. And what that means is you take inventory of your own sort of like joy, and what joy means to you. What does meaning mean to you? What does purpose mean for you? And sort of get really clear on that. You also listen to the whisper, that thing, that voice in the back of your mind that says, you know, this is an issue, this is a problem, and you might actually be the person to do this, right? You might actually be the person to take this on. And then the second thing you do is that you gather your tinder, right? You gather your tools. And in this case, it is your skills, your experience, the things that you love to do, your education, the gifts that you've been given. I share a story in the book of meeting the grandson of the Mahatma Gandhi, and he talks about how our gifts are not something we own, but have been given to us in trusteeship, and they're here for us to be able to use them to serve other people. So you gather all of those things and figure out, what do I have, what's in my toolbox that allows me to do the work that I do. And then, of course, after you've got all of your stuff together to your fuel, you find the spark, because every fire needs a spark, and that spark is that passion, that thing that you love to do. What is it that I love to do that I would do no matter what? And how can I tap into those skills and that experience and those gifts that I have to continue to do those things in service, and spark it with that thing that makes me so angry, that inspires passion as well, right? Like, this needs to be fixed. This needs to be something that people need to know more about. And then finally, when you've lit the fire, you've got to tend your fire. You've got to tend your soul fire. And this is what I mean when you do things in community like this, right? You gather your like-minded community to take care of yourself. You understand that everything that we as people of the earth, just like the earth, everything is ebb and flow, it's seasons. And so sometimes there's going to be times when things get so hard, you need to stop and take a breath. And you can do that without guilt, because what you're doing when you take that breath is that you're gathering your energy to go back in and fight again. And there's an ebb and a flow, and that the people that you're in community with are also ebbing and flowing. And that when you're taking a breath, somebody else is going in. And when they're going, and when they need to take a breath, you can go in. And it's a backwards and forwards. And then you celebrate, and you play, and you share, because here's the thing. The stuff that we are working towards, it may not be solved in our lifetime. So our point is to do this stuff in as much joy as we can, so we can take the baton or the torch, I should keep using light metaphors, right? The torch from the people who came before us, and we can pass it on for the people who come after us, right? Does that all make sense? Yeah? Okay, so that's really sort of, spoiler alert, that's kind of the book, right? The last half of the book, though, or the last third of the book, I think, is a manual where I told you at the top, I love journaling. And there's a bunch of journal prompts that sort of walk you through how to do all 4 steps of these things. And one of the other things, hang on, I hope I have, yeah, here we go, that I encourage you to do is to actually write a manifesto. Do you guys know who Brad Montague is? Do you know him? He's a wonderful, do you remember Kid President back when, yeah, so he's the filmmaker behind Kid President. He's also written a book called Becoming Better Grown-Ups and a children's book called Circles that is amazing. And I interview him in the book, and he talks about, he writes a manifesto. He thinks everybody should have a manifesto. It gets a bad rap. And so I encourage you to write one, but I include one in the book to kind of get you started. And so what I'd like to do, if it's possible, is I'd like to read it to you. And it's going to be up here, but if you'd like to close your eyes also, I'll just read it quietly to you to kind of, because I think it embodies who you guys are. So, the Lightmaker's Manifesto. I believe we are interconnected. I believe peace is the true way for change. I listen. I honor my own inner wisdom. I name my gifts, those which I hold in trusteeship, knowing that they are my superpowers. My different is beautiful. My privileges afford me the power to help those who are powerless. When I fall, I rise, moving through any doubt I have in my abilities because I have evidence to suggest otherwise. I am self-compassionate. I love fiercely, and I refuse to succumb to hate, acrimony, or fury. I believe joy, kindness, and celebration are acts of resistance. I dream of a better world, and I aspire to join the march toward its attainment. I blaze with courage and conviction. I am called to action. I am a light maker. So, light makers, thank you so much for having me here. I am just, again, so honored to have been invited to join you in this community, and I can't wait to see what more light you guys make. So thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Oh, there's moving things. I forgot you said that. There we go. There we go. Thank you.
I had to bring my copy of the book. Booksellers have to hold the book to talk about it.
Yes, please do.
Yes.
Hey, girl. Hey.
Hello.
What's up?
So I'm so happy you're here.
I'm so thrilled to be here.
My copy of this book actually has an Olympic College Foundation sticker in it because it was purchased for my partner who's a mental health counselor at a college right now. And their book club read your book.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank the book club for me.
College. And she was like, Kim, you need to read this. She was like, I feel like the things that they're telling mental health workers right now at this stage of the pandemic are similar things to what I hear you talking about in book selling, like the way in which we can maintain our joy in order to keep doing what we need to be doing. And as somebody whose partner's a mental health counselor, I'm a bookseller, and I feel like they're kind of the same thing sometimes. So I don't know about you all. I've had those customers. So, but it really spoke to me, and I want to hear more about how, specifically in this time when there's so much going on, when there's so much weight on the world, how do we maintain that joy in the ways that we're able to do things? So again, one of the things I love about, so you have your manifesto. You also talk about some other tools. You've got your vision boards.
Yeah, I love a vision board.
You've got the Star Collective, which I love. And it's something that I think is really relevant to the community space we're in right now. And you talk about all of these different tools that we can actually be using. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit deeper about some of the big things you talk about in the book, which again, the book will be available outside. You all should grab one on your way out.
You should get one. Some of the tools. So I mentioned journaling is a huge part of it. And so the book, can I play with the book here for a second? Yeah, thanks. So the book, I don't know if you can see this, but this is the book and this is the manual, right back in here. And it's just all kinds of prompts about how do you mine your experience, thank you, for what it is that you're really good at, what are sort of the things that people thank you for, and really it's a sort of self-inventory of what is it that you do that you can bring to the table. So that's one tool, but it is in this book. The other thing, though, I think that separate from the book that we have is community, and being really mindful of how we interact with our community of fellow Lightmakers and activists and booksellers, right? I think it's very easy, I know it's very easy to kind of go through life or go through anything and just think, okay, if good things happen to me, that's good, and if bad things happen to me, that's bad, and you just sort of figure out how to navigate that. And what I'm finding, certainly the older I get, is that you can curate some of what that looks like and how that looks. And so, so doing things like having a practice of celebrating is really, really important, I think. A lot of the people I talk to, some of them who were activists and told stories of like John Lewis, and how John Lewis, when he was working with the freedom fighters and everything else, like they would bake in celebration in order to be able to go through the really difficult things. I have a friend actually who her work, she does like PR brand stuff, but she only works with organizations that are nonprofits or have some sort of sustainability to them. And what she does, I'm not saying you should do this, but I'm not saying you should not do this. Every Friday they have champagne and they write in a gratitude book of any successes that they've had during that. And it could be little successes, but they would just, sort of pop champagne, and that's what they do. Now, not every place you can have champagne, more's the pity, but it's sort of baked into the culture of where she works into, that they celebrate and that they acknowledge when good things have happened and when they've done good work. So there's all these different, it could be, I don't know, chocolate chip Fridays or something when you do it. And, you can do whatever you can to sort of celebrate. And then also sort of model rest, because I really feel like rest is a tool of social justice. I really deeply believe that. And actually, I think if I were to do it over, I probably would have put that part in the beginning of the book, because I think it's not just something that you use for restoration, but you do it to gather the energy to go in, right? Like it's actually energy gathering. So there's all kinds of tools that we can do, but mostly it's just listen. It really is. It's listen to yourself and listen to what your community needs, and really sort of going into the ebb and flow of what that looks like. I don't know if I answered your question,
yes,
but
I
yeah.
love that. I think the intentionality of listening and being and making a mindfulness practice out of gratitude.
Yeah, for sure.
Is so important. I'm so bad at that sometimes. But,
Yeah.
But I think that it's so good to be able to encourage that, and again, tending to the flame.
Yeah, gratitude. I feel like gratitude is starting to get a bad rap because everybody's talking about a gratitude practice. But I did it first because I started doing it like 25 years ago. I will tell you that for me, gratitude really has saved my life. I was in a really dark place about 25 years ago, I would guess, maybe even longer, perhaps. Yeah, maybe even longer, now that I think about it. And I started like every night before I went to bed, sort of like, my eyes are closed, I've turned off the light, I say a prayer, and I think of one good thing, right? Like one good thing. And sometimes it's, I made a perfect boiled egg, right? Like sometimes it's nothing, sometimes it's big. But I will tell you that habit of doing it is, I think, the reason why my family navigated Hurricane Harvey as well as we did. Because I've never, including the day that the water came into the house, not been able to come up with one good thing, ever. And if anything, I think back to Harvey with a huge sense of gratitude, more than loss, more than grief, more than anything else, because it came in the way of strangers showing up and helping us muck out our house, or people bringing, literally total strangers bringing food and bringing, and the FEMA guy who came in and was really kind to us, and like it was really every single time it has helped. And activism, let's face it, we don't go into activism because things are good, right? We go into activism because something's made us angry or something's broken our heart. And if I can go through losing everything and come out of it okay, and we really did. I mean, I remember the day the water came in, literally thinking to myself, oh, this is the four worst in our marriage, right? Like we have a great marriage, but this is bad. Like we're literally about to lose everything, and we're going to have to navigate this. And I hope we do it well, because this is a stress like we've never seen in our marriage. And we came out of it. Today actually is my 20th anniversary. Isn't that great? And we came out of it stronger, right? Because we were able to, because I think of a gratitude practice. So I know it sounds trite, but really it does work. It really does.
No, I mean, I think about that a lot. There were all these think pieces that were coming out in the last year, and people would be like, oh, so tell us how it was being a bookseller during the pandemic, and how's your bookstore doing? And one of the things that really came out for me was gratitude at our communities. Like they showed up. Yeah. They looked around and they saw what the world could be, and they were like, you know what, we want to make sure this bookstore is still here. Yeah. And so that overwhelming feeling of gratitude, like recognizing there's some really horrible things that are happening right now and have come out of the last couple of years, but I can still come back and look at that and see that, and see that community around me has really shown up, and that's worth celebrating.
I mean, to that point, honestly, because I mean, we've been talking about a Blue Willow. So Blue Willow is my local books, like they're 5 minutes away from my house. And I think about what they do, and by extension, what you guys do, especially as independent booksellers. Like, you guys do such amazing work at taking care of your communities, right? Like, I mean, yeah, Amazon and Barnes and Noble, they're fine, but they don't have the soul that a lot of you guys have, right? And because of that soul that you bring to your communities, it doesn't surprise me that your community wanted to take care of you, right? Like you give love, you get love. That's how that works, right? Was that Paul McCartney? The love you take is equal to the love you make, or something like that?
Before my time.
I don't. She's been doing this to me all day. All right? She's been messing with me all day long, all right? She seems sweet, but she's the devil. Just know it. She is. Love you, Kim.
I love you. Wait, no, so I want to go back to your definition of activism.
Yeah.
There's a quote from your wonderful book. Activism, when approached with an intentional mindset, is all about creating experiences of meaning. And I love it. You continue. Activism means taking responsibility to find answers to the world's problems, dedicating yourself to a cause greater than your own interests. And that is the essence of bookselling to me. Like creating experiences of meaning for our communities, for especially as kids booksellers, for the children in our communities.
Yeah.
This is what we do and what we excel at. And seeing that as a form of activism, and again, that's when my partner was like, Kim, you have to read this book. Like, that's what she was talking about, is like, you were talking about activism in the same highfalutin way that I talk about bookselling, where I'm like, I am doing this vocational thing that is better for the world. And she's like so sick of my soapbox, but like, it is what we do.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about like kind of the way in which you talked about the, it's not just about protest, it's about creating space in your community and like bringing activism home. And I'd love to hear just a little more about how you feel that connects to bookselling and the future and children. Like,
so I started writing this. When I started writing this book, the first thing I did was read that book I told you about, the Book of Joy, with the Dalai Lama and Bishop Tutu, who are both faith leaders, right? And I also interviewed a guy, his name is Aaron Billard, and he does a Twitter feed called Unvirtuous Abbey that's very, very funny. And it's sort of kind-heartedly poking fun at Christianity. He is a minister, but he pokes fun at Christianity and at some of the ways that Christianity has been sort of warped in the world. But he uses humor with it. And so I had read all of this, like three faith leaders in a row, and I thought, I wonder if activism is spiritual. Like, is there something there? Knowing that first of all, I was not going to write a religious book, and secondly, I certainly think that you can be atheist or agnostic and engage in activism, right? But I was wondering, like, what does that mean? And so I ended up interviewing a guy who is the head of the Jung Center in Houston, he's a wonderful, wonderful guy, Sean. And Sean has a PhD in clinical psychology, I think, but he has a master's in theology. And so I thought, oh, he's a good person to kind of talk to about, joy. And I said, what is spirituality? What does that mean? And he, and I especially loved it because I found out while we were talking that he was raised Catholic, but his relationship, if it were a Facebook thing, he would say it's complicated, right? Was how he described his relationship with Catholicism. Yeah. So, and he said, spirituality is about experiences of meaning, is what he said. And he said there's certainly something that can be transcendent as part of spirituality, but it's really about having experiences of meaning. That's what spirituality is. And so, of course, when we talk about that and we talk about activism, so many, even the protests, right? Like, I've certainly done, like I said, the Women's March and the Pride parades. Certainly there's a lot of happiness and joy and glee that happens with there, but it's also incredibly meaningful being surrounded by people and getting loud with people who feel the same way you do, right? And I've heard people who do the more dangerous side, like protest, say the same thing, that, my parents, God love them, my parents in their 80s, in the middle of a pandemic, went to the George Floyd protest after he died. I'm like, old people, go home. What is wrong with, like, stop it. And they were like, it was amazing, right? Like, so they went, and they are well in their 80s. And they talked about how, and I was terrified. I was like, they're going to get arrested, right? And they talked about how much joy there was in being able to protest this really awful, horrible thing that happened. And that those are experiences of meaning. And of course, when you think about bookselling and you think about your ability and your commitment to introducing the world to new and evolving concepts and creating spaces to do that through hosting people like me to talk about our books, but also like children's read-alongs and all the things that you do, the circles that you create, like those are experiences of meaning, right? And in that way, what you do is, of course, very spiritual and can be very transcendent. And the trick, I think, is to remember those times and again celebrate and acknowledge those times, because the tough stuff of the people who refuse to mask in your stores when you ask them kindly to mask, or people who are arguing that you shouldn't sell this book because it is not what our children should be reading, or whatever, right? When you deal with those difficult challenges, you need to remember that really you get into this so you can create these experiences of meaning. And you know, the tough stuff's part of the gig, but it's all of it, right? Like it's everything.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm getting the Muppet arms from Allison, and I could just talk to you forever. I mean, y'all don't have anything going on today, right? Like, we can just hang out here. And, thank you so much, Karen. I'm so grateful.
Oh.
I mean, I will write you down as my gratitude for the day.
Oh,
How's
thank
that?
you. I will write all of you down on mine tonight. Thank you so much. Oh, keep doing your beautiful work, guys. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Fred. Oh.
Thank you for listening to Book to the Bookstore Education Podcast, brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!